when you talk about the protests that happened in 2017 by some far left people at that time, like as bad as it was, I thought at that time, I actually quite miss it because at that time it was people just yelling and making a scene and trying to interrupt events. Unfortunately, since then, political violence has continued to devolve, not just in Portland, but actually through many American cities. And throughout 2020, Portland and Seattle became the epicenter of far left American violence, where in my home city, the city you've been to several times to speak, there were more than 120 days of recurring nightly violence. So you're in Los Angeles. I know there was some rioting that happened after George Floyd died. Imagine what you saw there happening for 4 months straight.
I'm Dave Rubin, and joining me today is an American journalist best known for covering the Antifa protests in Portland and author of the new, already best-selling book, Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. Andy Ngo, my friend, welcome back to the Rubin Report.
Thank you, Dave. It's so nice to be speaking with you again. Well, last time we met in studio was shortly after I was beaten.
Yeah, you were hurting. I mean, you were actually still in quite a bit of pain, and you were medicated and everything else. I actually think that's probably the best place we can start, because I was trying to chronicle just the amount of time that I've known you, and I think I sort of came aware of you. We've sort of risen in the online world or whatever it is, starting in around 2015 or so. In 2016 or 2017. I did an event at Portland State University, and obviously you're from Portland, that's where you do most of your work and have uncovered most of this Antifa stuff there. I did an event with Christina Hoff Sommers, the feminist, and Peter Boghossian, the philosophy professor, and Antifa was there. It was the first time that they had ever protested anything that I had been part of. They called me a homophobe, of course. They called Christina a misogynist, of course. They called Peter a white supremacist, of course. And we did an event that, had to have a lot of security, and there was a lot of tension, and police had to escort us and the whole thing. Anyway, I mention all of that because I met you right after the event because you were covering it, and you were sort of just, with all due respect, my friend, you were like a kid journalist, and you were just kind of figuring out your thing. And now you've become the center of what's going on with Antifa. So first off, my hat off to you. And now that I've talked enough to start the show, can you talk just a little bit about that? Just sort of where you started with this whole thing? Because now everyone just thinks you're part of it, but you were just a scrappy kid trying to do journalism.
Yeah, that's right, Dave. Actually, I was part of the student group that organized the event that invited you. So just 4 years ago, I was just this student journalist, part of the free expression group at university, who was a fan of yours. And, it's been such a privilege to not just become better friends with you over the years, but then to rise up in our careers and our work, because it's really linked. And I think, when you talk about the protests that happened in 2017 by some far left people at that time, as bad as it was, I thought at that time, I actually quite miss it because at that time it was people just yelling and making a scene and trying to interrupt events. Unfortunately, since then, political violence has continued to devolve, not just in Portland, but actually through many American cities. And throughout 2020, Portland and Seattle became the epicenter of far left American violence, where in my home city, the city you've been to several times to speak, there were more than 120 days of recurring nightly violence. So you're in Los Angeles. I know there was some rioting that happened after George Floyd died. Imagine what you saw there happening for 4 months straight. That's what happened in Portland, and it's still ongoing now. It's just become weekly, but it's picked up speed. This week alone, we had, 3 riots in Portland involving Antifa.
So when you started seeing this, right? So you, as you said, you were part of a student group. You invite a couple people that we all considered ourselves good liberal moderates. And I remember before the event, because there was this threat of violence, they had to hide us in a room, and we had a police escort that had to take us from one room to the event. By the way, the event ended up being spectacular. It's online. We'll link to it in the bio here, and it was fun. And fortunately, there was no violence, but people were angry outside. That was sort of the beginning of all of this. Then over the last couple of years, it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. What was it about it that you saw that you knew that this was going to happen? Because you've been tracking it the whole time.
Well, I knew it wasn't just a university or campus phenomenon, what we were experiencing since going back to around 2015, that the ideology that was justifying these outbursts of far-left rage and sometimes violence on campuses would inevitably spill out to the wider cities where these universities are and where these students were returning to. And so, and that's exactly what happened very quickly in Portland. And I think the turning point, particular for its spilling out, pouring out from Academe into the streets, was the surprise election win of Donald Trump. So that just gave an excuse for all the excesses of the far left to go out and wreak havoc in the name of anti-fascism, anti-racism, and social justice. And they were given the legitimacy they needed through the mainstream media and through, unfortunately, left-wing Democrat politicians.
Yeah, okay, so for people that just see the videos now, and we've all seen the videos of what's going on in Portland and Seattle and everywhere else, for people that are sort of just watching from the outside that haven't been to events, I've been protested many times. You actually helped another video that I was part of go viral when I was up in Canada, and Antifa showed up and they were protesting that woman in the walker trying to cross the street, calling her a Nazi. It turned out, of course, that her husband was a veteran of World War II, literally fought Nazis. But these are the types of things that you've seen over and over. For people that don't really pay attention, though, that just see those little viral videos, and unfortunately you don't see them on mainstream enough, what is Antifa?
See, the videos, I don't think truly show the threat we're facing with. Some of them do, but I mean, like, these extremists carried out an insurrection in my city where night after night they were going with knives and guns and explosives and organizing themselves into different units in a marauding gang, essentially starting fires, and they eventually killed somebody. But to answer your question, what is Antifa? It is a movement and ideology and shadowy networks of people who call themselves anti-fascists but actually espouse an anarchist, communist, extremist ideology. So there's a lot of meaning in their acts of violence. I know it can look kind of meaningless and without purpose. But for example, the attacks on the federal courthouse in Portland last July that lasted for weeks when they tried to burn down that federal facility, that was because they viewed the American criminal justice system as a system of enslavement, of racism, a remaining relic of white supremacy. That's why they were doing that. That's why they attacked law enforcement and called for its abolishment. That's why they go after property rights as well. They view capitalism as intrinsically linked to racism. And so, like, bit by bit, they've gone after not just like literal institutions in America, but actually, I think more fundamentally, the founding ideals, the rule of law, freedom of expression. I mean, Antifa are probably most known for their anti-freedom of expression, in that they believe it is the not just appropriate, but righteous response to be preemptively violent to people who have wrong think or espouse the wrong views.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about the media instead of nonstop yelling, check out our media playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out the full episode playlist. They're both right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.